and the vanquished. And what I also, so I say this to start saying that that notion or that inclusion in the current constitution about the legitimacy of all Vincentians is particularly significant to me, given the way in which I think about our very civilization. One thing that we have to consider, I think, because of the way we came into being, is the mother in the Caribbean society. We think of the Caribbean as the motherland overall, but we could also think about the way in which the Caribbean mother, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, shepherded the children through the education process. It's really a Caribbean story for mothers to be solely responsible for taking their children through the process of education. And we need to give, I think, mothers some credit for what they have done. And I think that the Constitution does that to a fair degree. And I could tell you the story by way of illustrating this, for example, of my father, whose mother is a descendant of the black African, and whose father is the descendant of the white European. And his mother that was responsible for taking him through school. And for him to be able to continue going to school, she had to resist the notions which pervaded St. Vincent and the Grenadines at the time, that you don't really need school. You could listen to the radio and learn all that you want. You could be committed to a life in agriculture. And what this really speaks about is the way in which we, being illegitimate and inferior, weren't supposed to aspire to the very education that would now bring us to a point where we could have serious discussion on constitutional reform and serious discussion about ensuring that the document that the Constitution is really reflects our interests. And you could begin going down this line to think about the Queen being our head of state. This is something that you probably would have heard very often over the past couple of years in the debate related to the constitutional reform and how undesirable it is. And if we really look at the Caribbean history, we understand how undesirable it is. Because you could think about the situation in Haiti, which is the first free country in this West Indies, really. And as far as the Declaration of Independence is concerned. And in Haiti, when the mulattoes, or those who are mixed, began getting control of the land in Haiti, the white French reacted by enacting discriminatory laws, which said, among other things, one, that the mulatto couldn't be called by the title Mr. or Mrs. And when I think of the fact that a Vincentian cannot be head of state here, I reflect on the case of the mulatto that couldn't be called Mr. or Mrs. And I reflect on the case of that same mulatto who, when a white man happened to pass by his house, he had to give up his chair in reverence to that white man. And I think that some of those things are seriously entrenched in the Constitution now. And the effort was made to prevent us from conducting change to that Constitution in a way that isn't going to deteriorate into a very distasteful discussion. So when we're involved in the tribalism, as many people are these days, I want us to remember that that is precisely what they had in mind for us if we were to attempt any change of the Constitution. I want to also touch on the aspect that treats us as a child. So we have already established that their perception of us is that we're illegitimate, and we show how the current Constitution addresses that, even if just in a symbolic way. They also continue to treat us as children. Now, when you have a 3 or 4-year-old and there are matches around, you are afraid of leaving that 3-year-old or 4-year-old out of your sight. You have to tell them, don't play with matches or you'll get burnt. But when you have a situation where you're not telling a 3-year-old or 4-year-old not to play with matches, but you're telling a 30-year-old and a 40-year-old don't play with matches, then that can't hold as untenable. Because it's saying that you, even with all that maturity, are not able to actually harness a flame for your benefit and for constructive use. They didn't think that we were mature enough to handle it. And I'm not saying that if there is anything that prevents us from doing a good job as far as handling our own legal affairs are concerned, that we shouldn't stay back and sort that out and then move forward. But what I'm saying, and all that the proposed constitution really does, it says that we have the option of going to the Caribbean Court of Justice. It's not automatic. And it's saying as well that the British themselves could learn from us, rather than we being always dependent on them for their lessons. And one thing that I want you to note related to Caribbean history is that in the 1950s and 1960s and 70s and thereafter, the Caribbean author and thinker occupied a very important place in the world literature. Now, what has happened is that they have systematically sought to reduce the influence of the Caribbean author and thinker. There is no one today, we might say, that has the status of a C.L.R. James or an Eric Williams or a Walter Rodney from back in the day. And that isn't because we are any less talented in the Caribbean. That's because the West wants to dominate the agenda and wants to ensure that the people from the Caribbean who are exalted are actually those who are responsible in tearing things down here. And you could think of people like V.S. Naipaul. No doubt he's a quality writer and that you could learn from his books, but Naipaul's celebration by the Western world coincides with his denunciation of everything West Indian almost. He says that there is no history to celebrate in the Caribbean because history is built around achievement and creation, and nothing was created in the West Indies. Well, what we're going to tell Naipaul and everybody else who thinks of the Caribbean in such terms is that we in St. Vincent dared to conduct a constitutional reform exercise. We might not have conducted it in the most appropriate manner, but nonetheless, we have learned. And we have created a way in which we could harness this learning for the benefit of Caribbean civilizations or civilizations beyond the Caribbean. And that is significant. There are many other things that we could touch in the realm of this discussion. But since we have some strict constraints of time, I think we might allow them to be taken up in the course of a panel discussion as would follow. And I don't come here. The last thing that I want this gathering here and the gathering in the television audience to think is that I come here saying that the proposed constitution is a perfect document. And what was echoed before as well is that, if we enact this constitution and give it the 66 and the 2/3 majority required, it doesn't mean that we have written that constitution in stone. Change would be required again. And when change is required again, we would be better prepared to handle the discussion from the outset. So it means that 6 years wouldn't have gone by with little debate and discussion, because throughout that time, we'd be interested in the process and we'd be excited about deploying the ideas that we've learned in this process into the creation of a new document. I'm happy that St. Vincent and the Grenadines is going through this exercise. It means a lot to me, and it means a lot to you by your attendance here and also to those who join us on television. And let's continue to hold our head up and to make a meaningful shot at this constitutional reform. Thank you for having me.